Mohit Lad comes from a humble middle-class family in India, and he was very, very talented. So much so that he backed himself, got on a plane for the first time in his life, and set off to California with just $2,000 in his pocket, along with a burning desire to fund his educational aspirations. Essentially, Mohit took a big risk and it paid off. Fast forward 20 years and Mohit had set up and sold a highly successful tech business with his co-founder called ThousandEyes. He sold the business, or they sold the business for $1 billion to global network giant Cisco. It's an incredible story. We talk about steep learning curves, attracting investment from the right investors, and being non-negotiable on hiring against culture fit. Mohit's story is incredible. He's an articulate and brilliant communicator with a story that is literally breathtaking. This is one of the most enjoyable conversations, I think is fair to say, that I've ever had from his office in California. It's the CEO of ThousandEyes, Mohit Lad. Mohit, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast. I've been really excited about this one. How are you?
I'm doing great, Gareth. Thanks for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this one.
Let's just jump straight in, Mohit. What does good leadership mean to you?
That's a good question to kick things off, Gareth. I think the first thing I would say that is really important is empathy and understanding what individual roles mean, what it takes, what skill sets does it require, and also really understanding what challenges might be there. So I think it's about empathy to begin with, but to me, it's really about getting the best out of the team. So I believe a good leader can really challenge the team to do better than they've done before and really get the best out of them. And so I think a combination of empathy to me and getting the best. And empathy is hard. And one of the things I was really fortunate in a way to do at ThousandEyes was before I hired for every critical role, I had pretty much done it myself. And so I did end up having a lot of empathy towards each role I hired. And effectively, my job was to find somebody who would be better than me. And that was the goal.
Fantastic. That's a really good answer. I think empathy is underrated and is a word that people often don't use when they're talking about leadership. So how would your team describe you as a leader, do you think, Mohit?
Oh, they would have only good things to say. I'm sure. We do a lot of feedback as well. And I think the themes that I've consistently heard are around empathy, around culture, around building a culture that really has people who are just good-natured individuals, like life is too short. And one of the things that I know the team appreciates in how I lead is I have a zero tolerance for culture mismatch. It's all about making sure that no matter how skilled you are, if you don't culturally fit in with how the company or the team operates, you can't be a part of the organization. And I think that's one area where I believe the team appreciates the stance I personally take around things.
Sure. There's certain things which are non-negotiable, I suppose. And it's good to see that you put your flag in the sand in relation to the culture. But I would like to sort of dig into your background. I know, let's go back to the very beginning. You grew up in India, I believe, yes? So
Yes.
Can you talk us through your formative years and why you pursued a career in the technology space?
So if you've spent time in India, you would probably not be surprised that every kid growing up wants to be playing cricket for the country. And
sure.
that's a billion people who want to be on the cricket team that takes maybe 11 or 12 people, right? So obviously growing up, I was into sports a lot. But while I played cricket, I actually played more competitive sports in other areas like badminton and table tennis and
Right.
And one of the memories I have growing up is thanks to my parents, I actually was pushed to do a lot of things and develop myself more in an all-round manner rather than just be academic. So when I look back at my years, my first 10 years of school and so on, I would be in the top 3 or 5 in the class. I was almost never the top of the class, but I was in the top 5. But my parents pushed me to really do a lot of sports, a lot of extracurricular activities, and they just wanted to make sure that I get well-rounded. And my mom actually played competitive table tennis. She was also an engineer. She was one of the 2 female engineers in the entire university when she was graduating. So she was an electrical engineer. And so I had that sort of tech background in the house with two electrical engineers, and they also ran a business. So I was getting exposed to some of how they run their organization, their business. But I think what I remember most growing up is I was just doing a lot of things, and I wasn't just focused on getting the best grades, but I was fortunate enough to be getting really good grades as well along the way.
Yeah, sure. So how did you end up in California then? Now, how did that come about?
Yeah, so I got my bachelor's in Bombay University, and I did research in IIT for a year, and I was really passionate about getting a PhD in computer science, particularly focused on the internet, because that was the time when internet was really picking up. This was 2000 or so, and I was just fascinated by what this thing could be, and I wanted to understand it. I wanted to make it better and all of that, and then I found a chance to get into UCLA, which is effectively the birthplace of the internet and has some of the best research on the internet. So that was the appeal, and that's what brought me to Los Angeles at UCLA. And I'd never been on a plane before. So imagine that. Like I'm at this point, I'm thinking I'm 22 years old, and I'm just excited to get on a plane for like 24 hours. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to be on a plane for 24 hours. So I'm not even thinking about what happens if I don't get a fellowship or scholarship. It's just like, hey, I get to go to the US. I get to get on a plane, and that's an adventure for me. So it was really nothing to lose.
Absolutely, that's an amazing story. That's inspirational. So you ended up in a in digs in California. I'm assuming you didn't know anyone at that point, or you didn't know many people. Mohit, is that right in California?
Yeah, I didn't know many people, but I did have my aunt who helped me out. She was an hour away from UCLA. So I remember like every time I used to be homesick, I would just go to her place and get some home cooked meals and so on. It was an hour away. And I think one thing that we find with graduate school in a lot of places is it's a very welcoming environment. It is intimidating, but there's people who have come from different countries and they understand like it's a change for people. So I lived in a cooperative housing right outside UCLA campus, and it was a great
Right.
environment with a lot of international students. And that's actually where I met my wife as well, who's originally from Taiwan, and she was part of that housing environment as well.
So look, you took a risk there, Mohit, and it paid off, I suppose, didn't you? Because you've obviously had a great career in California ever since. And we'll come back to you taking risks maybe when we can talk about when you formed your company. But let's speak about your first big break in the private sector. Then correct me if I'm wrong. You left academia and then you joined. Did you join Nokia first of all, or maybe a smaller company and then
It was a
Nokia? Is that right?
smaller company, and it wasn't out of choice, by the way. I
Right.
had always believed that I wanted to be a professor because I loved doing research. I loved writing papers. I loved sort of creating insights from nothing and all that. So I found that really
Sure.
exciting. And I would be up like all night writing research papers to submit to conferences and all that. So that was my life.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I didn't get the track to work for me. So I tried to get into some of the top schools to be a professor, and I didn't even get an interview. And then there was a startup called Packet Design that was trying to recruit me because I was doing research in the same space that they were operating in. And I joined this company in I think like July 2008 or so. And that's when the economy started to crash. So at that point, it was a 2 month stint because 2 months into my first real job, I was called into the room by the VP of engineering and told me that they're laying off 20% of the team, including myself.
Oh, right.
And so that was like a 2 month startup experience, which was quite a pivotal moment
Yeah,
in my
sure.
career. So that was my first tech experience, 2 months getting laid off. And a couple of things that happened. One, during my PhD, my colleague Ricardo, who was doing research with me in the same lab, kept telling me that he wanted to start a company and that I should do something with him. And I had zero interest in doing that. I wanted to be a professor. That didn't work out. I went to a startup because I told him like, hey, I'm not, the company thing is not for me. I want to do this startup for a bit. And then I got laid off. And I remember coming out and calling Ricardo from the parking lot and saying, my plan A didn't work. My plan B is not worked. And I literally don't have a plan C. So if you're still interested in doing a company, I'm
Mm.
all in. I had to work for a period of time to just make sure I get my head together around what we're going to work on and so on. So I took up a job in Nokia for a year. We applied for green cards. We didn't have green cards. So it was all sort of like there were so many variables, and literally every single one of them fell in place. And we got our green cards. Then we decided to start the company together in 2010.
It feels like the stars aligned. This was meant to be then, maybe, Mohit, yeah? But so talk us through, first of all, you spent most of your career in academia. You'd had a little bit of a spell in a startup, and obviously you worked in Nokia, but you weren't really qualified to set up a high growth company, I think it's pretty fair to say. So talk us through that period in your life. How did ThousandEyes come about? Why did you call it ThousandEyes? And talk us through those formative early years.
I think when we look back at what we were most passionate about, we were passionate about the internet. That's what we did our research on. And what I could never get comfortable around is working on something that was different from what my passion was. So that's why I wanted to be in academia, because I could pick my problems and I could solve what I want to solve. And when that didn't work, I went into a company that was in my area, a field of expertise. And we started ThousandEyes because we realized that, we were 27 something and we could go chase an area of interest for both of us. And it came down to this was, pre-Netflix and pre-Nest cameras and all of this, but we had this vision that the internet was going to change how people live their lives. And people didn't understand how the internet worked. And we had done research visualizing it, troubleshooting it. We felt like we could build a Google Maps of the internet. That was the vision that we had. And Ricardo and I really felt like we have nothing to lose. We could try it for a few years. If it doesn't work, we can always find a job somewhere. But we wanted to chase a passion we had. And that's sort of how we decided to start the company. But it was also in one of the worst downturns because the economy had crashed. People were not funding. And when you go to an investor and say, hey, you know what, I got fired, but I'm starting a company and I have no work experience, that's not the best pitch you can make to get money. So obviously nobody wanted to fund ThousandEyes. And the reason we came up with the name ThousandEyes was sort of twofold. One, we wanted to build this Google Maps of the internet, and we felt we needed a name that captured the breadth of the data we have to collect and the fact that it's not one view, it's like from different places. The other funny story behind this is that my co-founder Ricardo had a project in his PhD called Cyclops. This is a project on internet diagnostics, but Cyclops being a Greek one-eyed mythical creature.
Yeah.
I joked with Ricardo that let's call the company ThousandEyes because whatever we build has to be 1,000 times better than your crappy project Cyclops. And it was sort of banter going on between. So we decided it was a fun name to also remember the Cyclops project that he had worked on.
All right. Okay. No, that's amazing. So you obviously met Ricardo at UCLA, I take it then, yes? You'd obviously knew each other for a long time. When you walked into the first pitch to get investment, what were you saying to people to get them to believe in your vision?
The short answer is most of the early investors didn't believe in us, and that's why we could not raise money. But we had a couple of things that worked in our favor. One is coming from the research side, we were familiar with some of the research funding coming out of National Science Foundation from the US. And we found out that they have a program that also funds high-risk startups. It's a small amount of money. It's $150,000. So we decided that we'll try that route, and we applied for a grant from National Science Foundation. And that was the first money that we got in, and that was $150K. That just gave us enough to quit our jobs, hire an intern, and start to build the first version of the product. So we gave up fundraising pretty early because when we tried, we were not getting anywhere. And we decided, let's just build a product and sell it. One of the few early customers we got was actually Twitter. And we were able to essentially look at what's happening in the internet and take it to some folks in different companies and say, hey, this is why your service is not available in this country because something is going on here in the internet. And most of these organizations did not see anything beyond their own data centers. So they could not actually understand why their service is not available in India or something happening outside. So some of these early customers we acquired because we were using our own product to show them outages and disruptions that were happening in their service. And that was our sales pitch. So before we got our first institutional round, we had just over 5 or 6 customers, and they were all big brands, like really big brands.
Yeah.
And the first investment came from Sequoia Capital, which is one of the best firms.
Yeah,
and it was actually more of an accident as well because we were not raising, but we were at a conference. I was at a conference and giving a talk on why the internet is this unsolved puzzle in user experience. And one of the partners at Sequoia was in the audience, came up to me after the talk and said, this was a really interesting angle. I've never seen anybody explore this side of performance because everybody focuses on the application itself. Nobody's focusing on the delivery. So let's talk. And this is a point where we were so tight on cash that I remember telling the partner at Sequoia that we can't build a pitch deck. We have to go and sell this product to customers and build features. So we can't build a pitch deck. And so we can't come and pitch. So we got our first round with a demo to the team at Sequoia without having an actual pitch deck. And then in the subsequent investments, we build up a pitch deck and so on. But Sequoia Capital was instrumental. There was also another individual. I was pitching to Facebook at that time as a potential customer, and there was a person called Jonathan Heiliger, who was the head of networks and infrastructure at Facebook, who liked the product and what we were doing quite a lot, and he ended up being an angel investor, even though he didn't become a customer. And he was also another critical person in our early journey that helped us with introductions and helped us like get some of our early customers. So, I felt blessed to have some of the best investors like Sequoia Capital, as well as some of the individuals who were really well connected in the industry to be a part of the early phase of ThousandEyes.
Yeah, sure. That's incredible, Mohit. I mean, that must have been such a journey for you and Ricardo. When you look back at that now, what stands out for you as being sort of the most memorable or pivotal lesson that you learned in terms of the early pitches and all the hardship that you went through?
One thing that I realized really got us through a lot of this is just the incredible passion we had and the belief we had in the problem we were working on. The pivotal moment was probably our first customer, and I can't discuss their name publicly, but I'll tell you,
Sure.
We were down to $5,000 in the bank. We were running out of cash, and we flew to Washington, D.C. to do a pitch to this customer. And we were showing them their environment like we do. We didn't know how to sell, but we were showing them our environment. And within 10 minutes, the SVP told me that, hey, stop, Mohit. We're buying this. How much is this product? And we had not even done pricing. Like, we didn't know how to price it. So we were like, wow, this person actually wants to buy. So it took us a few seconds to to internalize that somebody wants to buy what we built. Like, this must be real. Because as much as you believe in it, right? Like when somebody says that they want to buy this product and they're asking you about how much it costs, that is like the ultimate sort of proof in the whole pudding, right? That
Yeah, sure.
somebody wants to buy it. So that was the big moment. And I still remember like we basically could not tell them an answer there, but we went back and we decided to look at how much money do we need. We needed, about $150K to survive the next 6 months. And so we priced it backwards from there and said, this is how much it is per unit, because we wanted to bring the price to like just north of 150K. And this customer was just a phenomenal supporter of ThousandEyes. They're still a customer with ThousandEyes. And I think like it's moments like those that really give you the belief to keep going when you have somebody who puts their money behind your idea, not just as an investor, as a customer. So I still have that check framed in my office, by the way, the first check we got.
Oh, wow, really? That's something you'll have for the rest of your life, I'm sure. So in layman's terms, Mohit, what's your sort of elevator pitch for the offering? How do you describe it to people who are maybe not as technical as you are?
Think about how you would use Google Maps, right? If you're going from your house to a friend's house, you may know the route, but you still look at Google Maps oftentimes because you want to see if there's traffic, if there's an accident, if there's a congestion, or you want to take a different route. You want to make sure you reach the airport at time. And so you visualize this journey and see where the reds are. The parallel of this in the internet was missing. So if I was Twitter, for example, and I wanted to reach users, my data centers are based in the US, in San Francisco, and I want to reach the users in India or in China or in all these different places. I can't actually visualize how they are getting across the internet. What are the hops they're taking, where there might be an issue. And that's really what ThousandEyes does. It helps you understand how users are reaching your service, what paths are they taking, where there might be some outages that are preventing users from reaching your service or having a great experience. And when you actually understand this and visualize it, just like in Google Maps, you can take a different route. You can change the way traffic flows, so you can get around outages, you can fix things, you can announce, you can basically make your site represented on the other side differently. That's really that's what ThousandEyes is. It's producing this incredible visualization on what's happening to your traffic as it's going through the internet. And we do this by collecting a ton of data from the internet. And this is where our research background came handy. Is we came from the network background, so we know how to really go deep in network protocols and collect data from different parts of the internet. There's like three levels of innovation. First is the data collection.
Right.
We collect like billions of measurements per day on the internet. So think about that number. Then we do a lot of inferences and heuristics on all of this data together to find patterns. And then we actually spend a lot of time visualizing things as well to help people actually understand the journey between different points and where it's green, it's red, etc.
What excites you in terms of innovation within global connectivity at the moment, Mohit? What kind of products and what innovations are you keeping an eye on? I know Elon Musk is doing a lot to bring connectivity to, inhospitable places on the planet, being one example. But what are you keeping an eye on at the moment?
Yeah, I think first is access, right? Any innovation that brings more access to people, brings more people online is great. So, and online, not just from phone calls, conversations, but being able to use the most of the internet. So rollouts, Wi-Fi rollouts, city Wi-Fi's, like 5Gs, all of these are great for the organization, for everybody, for individuals. I'm also keeping an eye on all the innovation that is happening around just the massive adoption of cloud. That's been a huge game changer for organizations. The pace at which they can innovate has been dramatic. And it's also in many ways been a forcing function because of the pandemic, that even the most conservative companies that said like, hey, we're not going to adopt internet and cloud, were forced to adopt internet and cloud because they had individuals working from home and they had to support like a very different sort of workforce. So for me, the areas that have been exciting is anything around internet, anything around connectivity, the cloud architectures, and just the way the internet is evolving with previously used to have a more hierarchical internet architecture where you had a few providers that were very strongly interconnected to each other, and they were sort of the gods of the internet, and everybody had to come to them and then through them to get to the other side. But now the internet is flattening quite a lot. So if you have great content, if you're a Netflix, you can actually connect with anybody. You don't have to go through certain providers. And so that sort of whole ecosystem is changing. Internet is being more democratized, so to say. That whole paradigm shift is also very interesting. So enterprises, for example, are connecting directly to cloud providers. And that's also changing how they interact with cloud providers versus they used to go through a local provider to get to a cloud provider like Amazon.
Yeah, sure.
So there's just a lot of change going on here. And all of that is interesting because it's changing how people connect with each other. But the one thing that doesn't change, Gareth, is you still have to cover geographic distances, right? So if you're communicating with somebody from New York and you're in New York, your call is with somebody in Singapore, you're still covering a geographic distance. That's interesting. And then finally, I think I'm actually interested with the whole SpaceX and satellite internet rollouts because it's challenging some of the notions of what experience should be through those means, because a lot of the prior efforts at internet through satellites were not as fast and not as good. And so I think this is another interesting development, and it can be really promising to bring access to people.
Yeah, sure. Starlink you're talking about, yeah?
Starlink.
So it was quite interesting, wasn't it? With Elon Musk, he's obviously a bit of a joker as well as a genius entrepreneur, but I think it was quite well publicized that the internet connectivity got knocked off a large part of Ukraine during the beginning of the war. And I think, didn't Elon Musk open up the Starlink technology to a big area of Ukraine, so they were able to get connectivity, which was, it's crazy how we are able to, because he just switched it on like that and changed a lot of people's ability to connect to the internet. So which was incredible, really. But I think, look, there's so much innovation in this space. I'm just wondering in terms of what you guys at ThousandEyes are doing to keep your product current, and what you must have. I know obviously we'll talk about the Cisco acquisition in a minute, but I'm assuming competition has presented itself in large numbers. What are you doing to stay ahead of the curve as a team, as an innovation house?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think one of the things that we've always done well is we focused on the problem to solve, and the problem itself also evolves, right? And we've actually tried always to come up with clean slate, whiteboard solutions versus starting with what a competitor may or may not be doing. And so even when we started in the early days, a lot of people kept telling us like, "Oh, you need to do what company X is doing," and our response was, "Company X is solving an older problem. We're trying to solve the new problem. So we don't really care about what company X is doing. We care about who's solving this problem more than anything else." So when it comes to the Thousand Eyes vision and how we're thinking about things, there's really two or three elements to it. The first is the data. We're all about building the best view of connected environments end to end. And so we keep focusing on where there might be gaps for us in the data, and we want to find a way to conquer that gap. And this is one of the areas where the Cisco acquisition has been great because we have been able to deploy ThousandEyes on Cisco infrastructure that allows us to like now collect data from some of the most remote parts, like areas which would never be able to go and physically install ThousandEyes and all of that. So it starts with the data. The other area that we've been innovating on is once we have this immense, really powerful data set, how do we draw insights that are not obvious? And so there's a whole lot of innovation going on insights. We've actually done a bit of work. This was another incubation inside Cisco that we've brought inside ThousandEyes around being able to predict certain kinds of outages and disruptions in companies that are using internet. So that's sort of making sense of the data is really critical. And on one thing that I've been really passionate about, Gareth, is I think one of the philosophical differences ThousandEyes has come up with when we started the company was usually if you look at people who do network monitoring, and by the way, if you talk to anybody in the network side, like anytime there's an issue, it's always the network. Like they get blamed no matter what, right? And if you looked at companies that have done network monitoring, the approach has been more around enforcing an SLA, a service level agreement, or like it's more sort of, hey, it's not me. But what happens when there is an outage in an organization is there are different teams that get together, application, network, infrastructure, and they all come into a war room with this whole objective of proving it's not them. And so you think about like if I have a broken glass in my house, my kids first come up and say it's not
It
me.
wasn't me.
It wasn't me. That's the only thing. So I can't actually know who did it, right? And what we've taken is a philosophical different approach of we really want to help people collaborate with each other. And what's fundamentally changed is 5 years ago, when you had an outage, you would have mostly internal teams trying to resolve that outage together.
Sure.
Now, when you have an outage, you have to rely on somebody from potentially Amazon, somebody from British Telecom or AT&T, somebody from Salesforce. So like it is like a completely different ecosystem of dependencies, and it's really difficult to make that happen. And I'll give you an example of how interconnected the world is, right? So in our first office in San Francisco, we were five individuals in our first actual office in a high rise in San Francisco, and at 7 p.m. they would turn off the lights. 7 p.m. lights are off, and you had to pick up a phone like a landline connected on the wall and dial a number and enter a code to turn the lights back on. This was to conserve energy, which made sense. So for a week or so, I was doing that every day at 7 as the lights would go off because we were working till late night. And then my co-founder Ricardo said, "This is stupid. We're not going to keep doing this manually. I'm going to write a script and I'm going to automate the whole thing." So he wrote code, and the code was using a company called Twilio, which is a public company, and they automate interactions with phone systems and so on, which is really cool tech. So we used their APIs and their technology to write a script to run at 6:59 and just keep the lights on, which is brilliant, until a week later the lights go off. And when the lights went off, any normal individual would have stood up and dialed the code and turned the lights back on, but we were in the dark trying to debug why the script is not working. And after 15 minutes of typing and trying to figure out, we realized that our script was fine, but Twilio was having an issue, and it was because of an outage that had happened due to a storm in the east coast of an Amazon data center. That kind of internalization that our lights were off in San Francisco because of an outage in the cloud in the east coast of the country,
Yeah.
that just tells you how much dependencies you built in. Like it's super easy to write code these days with a lot of API calls and so on compared to what it was many years ago. But it also introduces unknown dependencies. And so when something breaks, you don't have any idea about what the ripple effect would be. Like it just can take down systems altogether.
Sure. And that is the danger of cloud-based services, I suppose, isn't it? But I mean, yeah, I didn't think that it would dictate lighting, but I've never heard
Well,
of that before. But I'm sure it's really common. I just didn't come across that before.
it's automation, right? Like it's the
Yeah,
use of
sure.
automation. You can automate the process of turning your lights on and off, and it's through an API call. But if the hosting of the API call is gone, your lights don't work. Like it's
That's fascinating stuff. I could talk to you about this stuff all the time, Mohit, but I want to move on to some other stuff then. So, outside of the connectivity world, what tech innovation are you most excited about? What are you interested in?
Yeah, I think the whole the connected cars ecosystem is pretty interesting. I think that's probably one thing that I find very fascinating is how transportation can change with cars that just have more tech in them, going towards full self-driving, automation, and whatever you call it, but also the ability for these cars to communicate with each other, because this is one thing that hasn't happened as much in the past, and the ability for potentially these cars to, or these vehicles to communicate with each other, things that are changing how public transportation works with just more tech coming into it. I think that's an area that is really fascinating, and I've had firsthand experience with Tesla and how upgrades are sent to the car and how the car's form changes, like overnight sitting in the garage. It starts to do different things tomorrow when it wakes up. I find that's really fascinating. And that's also fascinating to me because it still connects back to like internet and all of the stuff
Sure.
that I'm passionate about to
Absolutely.
begin with. More efficiencies can be driven if you have the right sort of technology and public transportation and all that come together.
So, I wanted to talk about this, Mohit. I'm sure you thought I was going to bring it up. 2020, was it the middle of 2020? You had interest from the world's biggest global communications company, Cisco. Talk us through, how did you get on Cisco's radar? Okay. And what was that whole experience like of being acquired? Because most people would never go through that in their lives. Okay, so can you just give us a little bit of a description of how it came about, and what did you learn from that whole process?
it was a very eye-opening process, right? Never been through this before. And the reason we were on Cisco's radar is because somewhere in 2013, Cisco IT became a customer of ThousandEyes. So they started deploying ThousandEyes within Cisco's environments because they were trying to figure out these issues that were happening outside of their own devices. And they couldn't figure out why, like, an office is not able to have a good experience to Salesforce or something. And because the routers were just fine. And Cisco makes some of the best equipment in the world. It powers the internet. So Cisco's own internal IT, as they were supporting the 100,000 employees or so, was using ThousandEyes, and they kept growing their use of ThousandEyes. And at some point, I think a couple years before acquisition or so, that they started to become well known within the Cisco leadership that there is a company that our own IT team is using, which we should probably take a look at, because if our IT team is using it, it means that there's something special here that is going on.
Sure.
And coming inside Cisco, by the way, having worked with the IT team, like they are really progressive, and so when they adopt a technology, it's actually pretty interesting. The other thing that was happening is we worked with pretty much all the large banks and all of these large Fortune 500. So when we came into Cisco 2020, we had close to 150 Fortune 500s as customers. And so when Cisco was running some of these advisory forums and so on with customers, they would hear about ThousandEyes from that side as well. And what happened is, because Cisco IT was pushing us to do more with them as a customer, we started deploying ThousandEyes on Cisco hardware within the IT environment. That was a big moment in the ThousandEyes history, because when our own customers started to learn about Cisco IT using ThousandEyes on Cisco, they started saying, "Oh, this is super interesting. We have Cisco gear in all our branch offices and all our data centers. Like, we'd love to put ThousandEyes on this Cisco infrastructure and like make sure that the data is more consumable and all of that." And so that sort of started a sequence of conversations with Cisco's leadership, which initially started as a partnership, then as an investment into the ThousandEyes business as we were growing, and finally they just expressed a lot of interest. And for me, it was really about data, because I felt like coming inside Cisco, we could just explore the data collection we have if we get on every Cisco device. And I just felt it was a strong culture match as well. And Cisco has a tremendous amount of experience doing acquisitions. So it was a strong joint vision we set together around ThousandEyes because our focus being on the internet and the internet threading through every part of Cisco's business. It was set up as an independent unit, not part of a product line. And the vision was that whatever we do will be able to have an impact on almost every Cisco product. It's been a very fast-paced environment over the last 2 years.
What a journey that must have been, being, stuck in digs, landing in California, not sure on how anything's going to go. And fast forward on the day you get acquired by Cisco. It must have been a very proud moment for you. What did your family think about the journey you've been on?
The family's been very happy, and I'm very grateful because this journey doesn't come without a tax, right? Like there have been
Sure.
so many moments. I was traveling a lot. I was not, I was missing dinners, like late nights and all of that. So my family has been incredibly supportive of all of this. Look, what I'm proud about most is that we've built an incredible team, and we've actually kept growing the team. If I come back to that acquisition, one of the things I did was I had a spreadsheet of every employee, and we had about 400 employees then. I had a spreadsheet of every employee. I had the data on how much stock they have, and I actually did the math on how much every employee would make, and really sort of sat on that spreadsheet for 3 hours before I made the decision to sell. And that was a pivotal moment for both Ricardo and me, because like we were just happy to carry on if needed as well. But we really believed that for all the employees, for the customers, that this was the right decision. And actually staring at that spreadsheet and looking at outcomes that people would have financially and be able to pay off loans and buy homes and all of that,
Sure.
that was a big driving factor to making the decision.
You must have been really pleased that the ThousandEyes brand was kept and retained. And because I know a lot of these acquisitions, they just integrate the product into their own existing suite of products in acquisitions of this nature. Was that
Yeah.
something that you guys insisted on, or was it just something that, it was just the best business decision moving forward to keep the brand?
No, I think Cisco is smart about this, and it has kept brands in the past when it makes sense, right? So Meraki as a brand has stayed, AppDynamics has stayed, there are several WebEx is another one.
Yeah,
So I
sure.
think it comes down to just doing what's right, and ThousandEyes had an amazing brand, even as a startup with as I mentioned, more than 100 Fortune 500 companies on it and so on.
Sure.
And the idea was to really like integrate but not disrupt. So I think keeping brand is one part of the decision process, but like we actually ThousandEyes leaned in heavily on integrating the ThousandEyes technology on Cisco and so on, because I didn't want to come inside Cisco and be an isolated unit. Like I wanted to leverage the might of Cisco. So that's why we actually leaned in on the integration, probably more than a lot of other startups. And
Yeah,
I
sure.
do believe we are one of the most integrated companies into Cisco.
What advice do you give to young entrepreneurs, Mohit? I'm sure you get people coming to you, following this amazing journey you've been on. What kind of reoccurring advice do you typically give for young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, I was giving a lot of advice last year, and people were not really thinking it was good advice. But my advice last year to people was don't get caught up in valuations and focus on the fundamentals. Like I kept telling some entrepreneurs that, but people were more keen on announcing on LinkedIn how much their company was worth. And I think
Yeah,
this is something that I keep telling people. There's a difference between when an investor values your company for, let's say, $500 million. That's different from somebody putting a purchase price on the company for $500 million. There's a difference, right? Like just because an investor has valued a company at 500 million
yeah,
doesn't mean that somebody's going to buy your company for 500 million. And I think the one advice I
sure.
would give to people all the time is focus on the fundamentals. Like at ThousandEyes, we actually every round we did, we raised the valuation of the company, but internally we never made that a metric. I was never in front of the all hands team saying, "Hey, we're valued this much, hooray!" It was all about we've got another round, our valuation has increased, but let's focus on customers, let's focus on revenue. Like these are the metrics that actually matter,
Yeah,
and that's my advice to people. Like when you're getting investment from an investor, especially in the first round or the second round, it's unbelievable how many people focus on valuations. Like when you're doing a Series A, your company is not worth much. And what is most
yeah,
important is to pick the right partner. And this is what we did with Sequoia. Like we picked Sequoia over another investor that had valued the company twice as much. So I would have, valued the company
Right.
twice as much if I went with another investor, but like we picked the best partner for the company,
Sure.
and that
Yeah.
was a big decision. So that's my advice to people is don't get caught up in things that don't matter. Like focus on the fundamentals of the business, and like if you focus on the fundamentals and you're building a company that is for the long run,
Yeah.
then you will always ride the ups and downs and market variations.
Yeah, that's incredible advice, Mohit. I can't believe you did that with Sequoia, but at the end of the day, I suppose that's one of the best firms to have invested in your company, isn't it? So, the same question, but the question this time is orientated towards yourself when you got off the plane and you were in UCLA, okay? But what I'm saying to you now is, Mohit, when you look back to that guy, looking back at your career, what advice would you give to your 20-something-year-old self?
Look, I think if I look back at my career, the one thing I tell my teammates and my colleagues now is I probably didn't drive the best work-life balance. And that's okay when you're single, but I felt like I should have done a better job. Like I still remember my wife was giving birth, and it was close to end of quarter for us, and literally between in her labor, between like the cycles she was having, I was going out and trying to negotiate some deals to close the quarter and so on.
Sure.
And I look back at that and I said, like, I feel like that was just stupid. I should have been there
Sure.
all through it and just shut my cell phone off. And so I think one advice I would have is you can do things and push yourself, but make sure that you put the right focus on family
Yeah.
and mental health, well-being, and just doing the right things with your family, your kids, because that is important. And ultimately, nothing's worth sacrificing all of that.
How do you achieve balance in your career with all this pressure and all these things going
Yeah.
on? How do you manage to do that?
Yeah, I try to make sure I don't work on Saturdays. That's like a no work day.
Yeah.
And I actually do work on Sundays, and I find getting a few hours in on Sundays is helpful because you don't have meetings and all of that, and so you can have a clear
Sure.
head. But I think it's about trying to get to the dinners and doing things with family that are important. We've carved out hours that are family time. Like I make it a point as much as possible to go to sleep with my kids. Right, I get to sleep with them. I get to bed with them. So it doesn't matter what it is. If they're sleeping at 9, I want to be in bed with them at 9 o'clock and
Yeah,
make them
sure.
realize that I'm with them. And so some of it is shifting my schedule to what the kids' schedules are, being awake when they're awake for school. That becomes important. And like a lot of times, both if I'm in town, my wife and I will both drop the kids together. We want to make sure that while one is enough to drop the kids, we both want to be there. And so we're one of the few families that are often like both are there to drop the kids. And I actually think it's important to cherish those moments together. We cherish family time not just within our family but our extended family. So anytime we have some time off, like we will take them to India or Taiwan and just get them exposed to broader families, broader cultures. My kids, by the way, speak fluent Chinese, fluent Mandarin, and I speak Marathi with them, which is my native language. So we keep them trilingual, and it's actually fun to do that as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's great to give your brain something like another challenge aside from the daily grind, isn't it? So that's fantastic. Top piece of productivity advice. How do you stay productive?
I think my number one advice for productivity is reduce unnecessary meetings. I think that can suck the life
Yes.
out of you. And the other sub advice that I give people, and I'm doing that myself, is walk and talk, which is a lot of calls, like
Okay.
especially with your directs, like people who you know well, your teams.
Sure.
If you're doing one-on-one check-ins, I do the walk and talk where I'm not on my screen. I'm going to take a walk outside, and I tell my other party here as well, like, hey, go take a walk in your backyard or wherever. We'll walk and talk. And so I think that's a good way to.
Any particular tools like that you use, productivity tools or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, for productivity, we've used things like Todoist and all of that to keep you on track. But I think
Sure.
it ultimately comes down to personal discipline of get yourself out of meetings you don't need to be in, reduce that time, and like have blocks of time that you can get work done. Because I try not to have half hour blocks between meetings. I try to create a larger block of time.
Yeah,
because it
sure.
does take time for your head to like reset. And so my advice is, if you do your schedules, try to do meetings in one block. Try to have a block of time without any distractions, and then walk and talk. Like that's I find that super productive to walk and talk. It clears your head. You can look outside, and
Yeah,
maybe
sure.
some places it's a bit easier to do with weather and so on. But like try
Yeah,
to do it
sure.
as much as possible.
Not great in the UK with all this rain, but nonetheless, I think walking and talking, it makes you more creative as well, doesn't it? I mean, it
Yes,
just,
it
you
does.
think
Yeah, it
more.
clears your head. Yeah.
Do you have any books or a story, documentary, any piece of content you would recommend, Mohit, that's been very impactful for you?
So I think one of the books that I enjoyed reading was The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I
I
might be
know, yeah.
saying the topic title wrong here. It's by Ben Horowitz. And I thought that was a really interesting book because what it gave me is perspective of challenges that another entrepreneur had in building a company and all the rough things they had to go through. And then I put that in perspective with my own challenges, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm going through is nothing. But it was actually an incredibly inspiring book, I felt, and I would recommend that for people who are not, even if you're not an entrepreneur. I think it's an interesting book to read and be inspired by.
Fantastic. Mohit, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, literally, I could have spoken to you for so much longer. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Wow, where on earth do we start with that one? Such an incredible and inspiring story of risk-taking, audacity, belief, and knowing what type of company you want to build from the outset. My favorite point and lesson that came out of this recording has to be around the early phase of ThousandEyes, where they attracted attention from a particular key person at Facebook very early on who believed in their product. And then obviously came the VC money from Sequoia Capital, one of the top VC firms in the world, which really set them on their path. Mohit provides a brilliant yet simple piece of advice to entrepreneurs, which is how they achieve this in terms of getting this early investment in. Believe in your product is such an important point. The fledgling entrepreneurs, it was backs against the wall stuff. They were down to their last $5,000 in the bank following multiple setbacks, multiple negative receptions, but they believed in themselves and were relentless in their pursuit of making this work. I thought that was just brilliant. I also really enjoyed Mohit's explanation of how they are remaining competitive in an ever-evolving marketplace now that there's further, more sophisticated competition. Essentially, he talks about predicting customer challenges in the future through data. When they started, it was about solving today's latency issues or network availability issues. But now they're trying to solve problems 6, 12, 18 months down the line that their customers don't even know that they're going to have, So I thought that was fascinating. There were numerous instances of value throughout. An amazing conversation. I loved it. I hope you did. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for downloading this episode. We really love doing this show and are absolutely humbled by all of the incredible people who download and listen, plus the incredible guests who take the time to come on and share their secrets and experiences with our listeners. Please can I ask that you take a couple of seconds to subscribe or follow the show. This small action means a lot to us and helps us greatly. Thank you. As you quite possibly have heard me mentioning in the past, we record the mass majority of our episodes at an amazing studio facility here in Cardiff at Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community of entrepreneurs and scaling businesses geared towards supporting growth in tech, digital and creative industries across an ever-increasing collection of locations and partner locations, UK-wide and internationally. It really is the perfect place for your business to start up, scale up, accelerate, or innovate. Head over to tramshedtech.co.uk or just search Tramshed Tech on your favorite social media platform.